Okay, hello girls. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to read through and discuss the two sets of notes that we have here, one being the introductory Renaissance notes to the history side of things for the Renaissance, and then the next video or this video, depending on how long it is, will be about the literature of the time of the Renaissance. Okay, so I kind of marked it up for you a little bit first so you could be interested in the highlights and it wasn't just text. So just follow me as I go along here. I will try and keep pace with my little pointer. So the Renaissance will take over 1500 around 1650. We are now past the Middle Ages. And when you talk about the Renaissance, what do we mean? A lot of people equate Renaissance with rebirth, and that's kind of like a parroted response to the Renaissance. It's more than that, though. I don't want rebirth as an answer. I want you to expand. It was a rebirth of many things: literature, art, music, science, all the wonderful things that came out of the Renaissance in creativity, in design, in intellectual skills. Looking at the notes here, it says an awakening, a vitality. Life was to be lived and to have fun. Like if you had to come back in time, I would say the Renaissance would be a really great time to kind of pop back in and maybe get a little taste of. It seems like there was so much happening, and if you had a creative bone in your body, this was a really great place for you to be during this particular time. So if you notice here, we have 3 bullet points, and I'm going to carry this through similarly with both the history and the literature, and I kind of color coded things for, easier visuals. So we're going to look at first the rise of the Renaissance, which will include the Tudor kings. Then we'll look at the height of the Renaissance, where it kind of levels off and Queen Elizabeth rules. And then we'll look at the decline of the Renaissance, the ending of this time period with both of the Stuart kings. Now, first we're going to look at the historical side of things. Now, obviously this is a literature class, but it's really great to know some of the history and what is happening during this time period to understand the literature that came out of this period. So going, excuse me, going back to the notes, we're going to head back to the rise, which is all the blue. So, talking about the rise of the Renaissance, we start with Henry VII. So, what I'm pointing out to you with these arrows, and you'll notice throughout the whole little text here, is the religion of each of our rulers, because it does hop back and forth between Catholics and Protestants. And in some cases, it really actually matters what their religion was. All right, so if we're looking at Henry VII, he was a Catholic king. He was an excellent king. He unified the country. He increased the treasury, meaning he brought in money, and he strengthened the idea of the crown, right? So he was a generally great king who really helped England. When you strengthen the crown, when you bring the people together, when you unify the country and you bring in money, you are well set up for anything that comes in your way, right? So when the Renaissance hits England, they're ready. Right? There's no more war, but Henry VII has prepared them for anything that they need. All right, so obviously Henry VII passes on his throne to his son, Henry VIII. Now, I'm sure you've heard of Henry VIII in some way, shape, or form. He's one of the most famous kings. The movies are made about him. Oh, if you've ever read or watched the movie The Other Boleyn, the Other Boleyn girl, the Other Boleyn sister, I forget now what it's called. It is an amazing book, and it is a terrific movie, actually, too. If you get a chance, take a peek at it. All right, so we're looking at Henry VIII now. Now, if you notice, Henry VIII, well, he really starts out as a Catholic because his parents bring him up as a Catholic, but we basically qualify him as a Protestant, and I'll explain why. A few things about Henry first. As a man, he was greedy. He was so different from his father when he comes into being the King of England. He decides that he loves the idea of the wealth of the church, right? And he is in the throne. He's the royalty. He's the king. He is not the church. But he wanted, he wanted to have all that the wealth of the Catholic Church had. But he wasn't getting any of that with this separation. So he broke away from the Catholic Church and created his own church. He called it the Anglican Church, or it's called the Church of England. Now, there were a couple of reasons behind him doing this. One, which we'll talk about in a second, is his wife, Catherine, and the idea that he wanted to divorce her. And in Catholic religion, you can't do a divorce. Let's take a quick second and look at Protestant. So I just said he became a Protestant. So Protestant means to protest, right? Protesting against the Catholic Church. Now, there are many different sects of the Protestant religion, Methodist, Lutheran, etc. So it's where they're protesting pieces of the Roman Catholic Church. So this is what Henry VIII did. He set up his own church. He set himself up as the head of it. Therefore, he has both the wealth from the royalty, being the king, and he also has the wealth of the church, which is really what he wanted. All right, so let's look into his personal life here. So he has many wives, right? 8 wives, but we're only going to talk about a couple of the wives that affect us in this time. So he first marries Catherine of Aragon. Now, Catherine is from Spain. So, of course, back then, we were always trying to unite the countries, right? So if he's in England, they marry him off to the princess, let's say, of Spain, sort of joining those countries, keeping their community open, Spain and England, which is a good move. So that's kind of where Catherine came from. Now, he was married to Catherine for quite some time. Now, the main goal of a queen is to provide an heir to the throne. Now, back then the medical care wasn't that great, and a lot of the babies were lost. It took a lot of time to have and keep babies, and we didn't have all this medical technology, so you weren't sure if you were pregnant. You didn't quite know when you were ovulating, so sometimes it was a guessing game. So Catherine of Aragon gets pregnant, finally has her baby, and she has a daughter. Now, this is a big problem because kings don't want daughters, they want sons to take over their throne. So now we have Catherine, who has her beautiful daughter Mary. She is being raised Catholic because her mother stayed Catholic, even though the father turned to the Anglican Church. She keeps her Catholic beliefs, and there is no son. So what happens is Catherine is not producing a boy heir. She's losing babies. She's getting older. And the king starts to have affairs on the side, right? And he meets this woman, Anne Boleyn, and begins to have an affair with her. And what happens is, well, number one, she's not the queen. And of course, all of this is out in the open. It seems to be hush-hush, but people know. Anne Boleyn will not move forward with him until Catherine is gone. So this plays into the idea of him making his own church, being able to divorce his wife, which Catherine fights back about. She does not want a divorce. She doesn't feel like it's fair to her. She's super Catholic and doesn't want to have this on her, being Catholic, being divorced. So she puts up a big fight. Anyway, she loses that battle. He then marries Anne Boleyn. She becomes queen. Now she is Protestant. So now we have Henry, who is Protestant, Anne is Protestant. They have a child together, but they have a daughter too. Like, again, Anne is desperate to have a son for her husband. She's also a little power hungry. And if you watch that movie or read that book, there's so many great things about Anne Boleyn you discover. But she basically wanted to be king. She settled for being queen, but that was not really what she wanted. So she has this daughter, Elizabeth, who she raises Protestant. And again, no son. She is desperate to have a son, and she cannot hold a baby, and she does not have any more children. So again, Henry turns to have more affairs, and he ends up with Jane Seymour. Anne Boleyn is then cast to the side. She even spends a lot of years in the Tower of London and eventually gets beheaded and killed. Jane Seymour comes along. She finally gives Henry his son. Now, Edward VI, Henry's son, is born. Now, he's a very sickly child. Now, Jane, having Edward, I'm sorry, did I say Henry VI? It's Edward VI. Jane dies during childbirth, so of course she's not going to be giving him any more sons. And they birth this very sickly child. At this stage in the game, he ends up with more wives, etc., but this is as deep as we're going to go. So when Henry VIII dies, his first oldest son is only 6 years old. Edward VI. Now he comes to the throne as the child king, but obviously a 6-year-old cannot rule England. So Parliament, who is Anglican, will stand in and rule for Henry VI until he grows old enough to take over. Now, Edward VI turns 9 and he does not make it. He dies, and therefore Parliament again continues to rule the throne because there are no male heirs, and this is a problem, right? The daughters were young, the son is now passed, and what are they going to do? What is England going to do? So they do decide that Mary, his oldest daughter, who was his first wife's daughter, who is Catholic, Catherine of Aragon's daughter, Mary, she takes over the throne after Henry VIII dies as oldest daughter. Now, a few things about Mary as queen. Number one, right here it says she was called Bloody Mary. That was her nickname. What a great nickname, right? But for not good reasons. So she believed in being Catholic, and she did not agree with being Protestant. So she said, while I rule, if you're Protestant, you need to become Catholic, or you'll be beheaded, right? This was a no-win situation here. You either changed your religion to become Catholic, or you were beheaded. And that was really what she was known for. That's kind of how she ruled. Clearly, a lot of people did not enjoy her rule, and she dies. Not a lot being attributed to her. So now, again, we still have no son to take over. So Mary, okay, she did okay. So let's put his second oldest daughter up on the throne. Now remember, Elizabeth was born to, oh my gosh, why am I blanking? Anne Boleyn. And she is Protestant, right? So she sits on the throne. She becomes queen at 20 years old. She had a different kind of view of things. She was much more tolerant than her half-sister Mary was when she ruled. And her thoughts were here, number 2 and number 3. If you're Protestant, stay Protestant. That's fine. If you're Catholic, stay Catholic. Totally fine. As long as your religion doesn't interfere with my ruling of our great country, then stay that way. Totally fine. This was called middle-of-the-road Protestantism. Okay, it's the philosophy that she practiced while on the throne. Now, clearly, after having Bloody Mary on the throne, this was really a relief to all the people because they could keep their religion. They weren't being threatened to be beheaded if they didn't change, etc. So she comes on this throne at 20 years old, looking forward. She rules until she's 65 years old. 45 years of ruling. Now, she was a wonderful queen. Everyone loved her. She was a strong woman, very educated, wrote poetry, gave her life to ruling England. Looking at number 6 here, they called her the Virgin Queen. That does not mean she was a virgin. It just means that she even publicly devoted her life to being the ruler of England, where she didn't need a husband. She didn't need well, I guess if you marry a queen, you're more of a prince than a king, I guess, just like our Elizabeth II now. But she felt she wanted to be totally devoted to the country, so she never marries. It doesn't mean she doesn't take lovers or she doesn't have men on the side. It just means she never formally marries. Now, when Elizabeth dies, because she's not married, she has no children, and she leaves no heirs. Again, another problem. Who is going to take over? Now, we've gone through the children, so she must appoint, as she's dying, she must appoint someone to take over for her. Who will rule? Now we have Elizabeth names the distant cousin James Stuart of Scotland the king. Now he becomes James VI of England, even though he was Scottish. A couple notes here. If you've never seen the Elizabeth I movie with Cate Blanchett, watch it. It is so phenomenal. This is the height of the Renaissance right here. Elizabeth, her whole ruling is the height. She flourishes here with bringing in artists and writers and singers and musicians and sculptors and everybody. She thrived on having an arts explosion. Now, when she dies, things start to decline, right? We're coming down the slope now. She brings in James I, who is a Stuart, James Stuart, from Scotland, and he is a Protestant. Now, she was also a Protestant, but he believes more in this idea of the divine right of kings, which is basically the idea that God has chosen me king.